Bonjour à tous. Today I have the pleasure to share with you part of the study results of the study we conducted in Mozambique on acquired and transmitted drug resistance. So the global scale-up of antiretroviral therapy has allowed an increasing number of individuals to access to HIV treatment in recent years, contributing to a dramatic reduction in HIV mortality and incidence. As a consequence of wider access to treatment, drug resistance emerged, and it represents a global threat. The WHO has developed a global strategy based on the surveillance of drug resistance at national level to tackle this issue. In the 2017 HIV drug resistance report, 11 countries have reported national data, and only 3 of them are from Africa, where the burden of the HIV is the highest. So there is an urgent need for evidence on resistance. But unfortunately, drug resistance testing is not routinely available in low-resource settings due to the high cost. And so current data comes essentially from specific studies. So what about HIV drug resistance? There are 3 categories of drug resistance. Resistance acquired in person while is on Earth, who can transmit resistant viruses to an infected person. And pretreatment drug resistance, that is a mix between acquired and transmitted, and is an operational definition given by WHO. It refers, in fact, to drug resistance in people going to the health facilities and initiating or reinitiating ART after interruption. This presentation will focus on acquired and pretreatment drug resistance. So we conducted the study in Mozambique, that is a high HIV level prevalence setting. The study was in 2 districts in the province of Tete, located in the north, that is essentially a rural peri-urban area, and in the capital city of Maputo. MSF supports the decentralized HIV programs, and since 2013 has also supporting viral load testing scale-up. In 2015, programmatic data showed very high proportion of viral load above 1,000 in Tete and in Maputo. For a non-HIV expert in the public, a first viral load is considered as a suspected virological failure. 2 consecutive high viral loads are considered as virological failure. Although aware that programmatic data were slightly overestimated, in our study we aim to understand the contribution of drug resistance in the virological failure. So the study was divided in 2 components, acquired and pretreatment drug resistance component. Part of the acquired component was the assessment of the level of the virological failure, the resistance profile, and the virological suppression at follow-up test. For the pretreatment component, the objective was the assessment of the level of drug resistance among ART initiators and among those already exposed to antiretroviral therapy. We conducted 2 cross-sectional surveys. For acquired component, 3 sites were included. Patients were eligible if adults and if on first-line ART since at least 6 months. And the main assessment were plasma viral load, drug resistance tests, and the follow-up viral load 3-6 months later from the first viral load. For the pretreatment drug resistance component, we included 8 health facilities, and patients were eligible if adults and if they were ART initiators or reinitiators after an interruption of at least 3 months. The assessment was, the main assessment were the viral load on dried blood spot and the drug resistance test if viral load was above 1,000. In both components, the interpretation of the drug resistance test was done using the Stanford algorithm, and we consider as a resistance all the sequence with the low, intermediate, and high level score. Now I'm going to present you the acquired drug resistance results. So we included more than 1,100 participants with a bigger representativeness of female. The median time on ART was nearly 5 years, and our study population was essentially clinically stable. The most common ART regimen was the once daily regimen, tenofovir based. At cross-sectional assessment, viral load identified 11% of study participants with a suspected virological failure. These patients were referred to the programmatic enhanced adherence counseling, and after, 77% of them still had a high viral load, so they were considered as a virological failure. To investigate the nature of the virological failure, we performed a drug-resistant test at the first viral load. This graph depicts the resistance profile by ARV drugs among participants with a viral load above 1,000. You can see on the left that 91% of participants had at least one drug resistance. 90% had resistance to efavirenz or nevirapine, that are NNRTI molecules, and 74% had resistance to at least one NRTI molecule, that is the backbone of the first line. Overall, drug resistance was very high to first-line molecules prescribed in the field, and most of them had resistance driven essentially by efavirenz and nevirapine that were often high-level resistance. So the majority of patients were under a suboptimal regimen, and 71% of them were switched to second-line regimen. Now I present you the results about pretreatment drug resistance. So, again. Okay, so we included 735 participants. The median age was 34 years, and the majority, more than half of them, were included in the site of Theta. In terms of gender, sex ratio, it was more balanced in this component, and in terms of prior exposure, okay. 13, I don't know, sorry, there is something. Okay. 13% of study participants self-declared a prior exposure to ARV. And the most common, so for 95% of them, was the ARV interruption of at least 3 months. Regarding the viral load assessment, 82% had a viral load above 1,000, where 1,000 was our technical threshold for the drug resistance test. It is to note that less than 18% is expected in a PDR population. So PDR, per definition, is focused on resistance to NNRTI. Why NNRTI? Because it has been shown that people with NNRTI resistance are less likely to achieve viral suppression and more likely to acquire further drug resistance. WHO has set at 10% the threshold for PDR at national level. If it is above 10%, a non-NNRTI first-line regimen should be used. In our study, we found 26% among participants with a high viral load. And if we consider all participants, the proportion is still high, 19%. So, one-fifth of ART reinitiators starts a suboptimal regimen. If we look at NNRTI resistance among pre-exposed and naive participants, as expected, the resistance levels are higher among pre-exposed, 55%, against 21% in never exposed to treatment, and it was statistically significant. And this is in agreement with the similar studies. So to summarize, for the acquired component, we had a good virological suppression of first-line ART, and the virological failure was essentially driven by resistance. Most of virological failures required a switch to second line. For pretreatment drug resistance, we have alarming level of NNRTI resistance. They are double the 10% threshold defined by the WHO. In ART pre-exposed patients, the level of PDR is twice as high as those who are ART naive. So in conclusion, this data should sensitize the clinicians to a fast regimen switch without any delay in virological failing patients, but also underlines the need to assure access to viral load to identify those at greatest risk. A more robust regimen containing integrase inhibitor as the dolutegravir that has a higher genetic barriers has to be considered, as it is the case in the near Malawi, where Epicentre is collaborating with the MOH in the enhanced monitoring of the implementation of dolutegravir as a first-line regimen. If these findings were confirmed at national level, then Mozambique should urgently change to dolutegravir first-line based regimen. And in terms of surveillance, of course, we need an implementation of a national survey for acquired and pretreatment drug resistance. I would like to thank all the study participants, the great teams that work in Tete and Maputo, the Ministry of Health, the study coordinators, my colleagues in Epicentre and in Maputo, in Tete, and other partner collaborators.
Thank you very much.